Hi, I'm Ben Murphy. I'm the creative director of America First Mo, and a special guest interview this evening. I know some of you have been used to seeing me interview with Sonny Wilson, former GOP field director, Sonny Wilson whistleblower. But this evening is a special guest, and I'm honored to have with me my boss, Annette Read, the executive director of America First Missouri. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you, Ben. I'm not exactly your boss. I just take your lead.
I take all my direction from Annette. It's much easier that way, believe me. So, Annette, we've been talking about getting on together and doing a show, if you will, or an interview for some time. And this is perfect timing because we had, first of all, I want to let people understand how you and I got involved with politics and AmericaFirstMo.com. And it all started out, I guess, in the fall or winter of 2015. And we were all on Twitter, and we were all excited about then candidate Donald J. Trump in the Republican race for the nomination.
Right.
And I was trying to find out information on who was going to run the campaign for Donald Trump in Missouri. And it was eerily quiet. Couldn't figure it out. I know I made it a point to get introduced to and meet with Bill Hennessy. Nobody knew who was going to get the nod to run this campaign. And I know that we were coming up on January of 2016. That would have been 3 months before our primary. And we really didn't have anybody who was anointed the campaign director in Missouri that I recall at that time. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to be those people, to be those organizers for the campaign in Missouri.
That's right. I was in a similar situation, and I was already a big fan of Twitter before I got shadow banned recently. But I thought I would start collecting Twitter supporters of Donald Trump, and I remember messaging you and messaging as many as I could find. Are you interested in working the caucuses, things like that? And I didn't know you at all. We got together not too long after that, after I vetted you and I was comfortable with meeting a stranger. But then we really helped with the caucuses. And from there, we knew we had to handle the movement. There was no one in charge, if you will. Early on, they had a woman working on it. And then eventually they moved in Aaron Willard. He was really good to us, but we just knew that we had to take care of the state as best we could with all of the followers we knew were supporting Trump.
And I know I defaulted to the way we ran the Buchanan campaign, if you will, some 20 plus years prior, when I was working with John Bruner's father, Jack Bruner.
Yeah.
And Jack had the franchise, if you will, to run Buchanan's campaign. And, it was what a grassroots operation that was, to include Phyllis Schlafly. She was in there with us. A lot of the old John Birch Society folks that that I'd worked with.
I can't imagine.
It was quite a time. And, we delivered more delegates to the Republican National Convention in that effort than any other state. And that gave rise to Ann Wagner's political career back then. She really got her start then coming out of the Dole camp. But here we are 20 plus years later, and like we said during those Buchanan campaigns, without orders from headquarters, mount up and ride to the sound of the guns. And that's kind of what we did, and we loosely formed Show Me Trump Missouri. That was our Twitter handle. And we organized across the state, and specifically I pretty much zeroed in on the St. Louis effort, but you organized across the entire state of Missouri.
Well, we knew that the best organizational model would be to take the 114 counties, find at least some sense of a leader in each county, and then unify everyone that way. That was going to be the best way to organize people. But it was such a roller coaster. If you recall, we lost in many of the caucuses. Some of them were contended. I did not at times think that we would make it. I never let that show. But then here we are, and it was such a roller coaster, though. I had my own political background like you did with Pat Buchanan, because I've always been a Republican, but I thought it was important to represent the people that felt a little more independent, and those were mainly Trump supporters. So I had about 8 years at that point under my belt with campaigns that were slightly more independent, with Paul Kurtman being the first campaign I worked on. That was
Paul's campaign.
Yeah.
Now, weren't you? Didn't you come up in the Ron Paul the revolution, or was that not?
No, ironically, I was labeled that, but
I thought I heard that.
I knew Paul Kurtman supported Ron Paul, or I take that back. When I got to the Capitol and I was working for him as his assistant, I felt somewhat betrayed because I didn't know he was a Ron Paul supporter, and I was like, "Oh, he's one of those crazies." Well, and since then, I've learned that Ron Paul is just a wonderful man, a brave man who represents everything that anyone believes in. If you really get down to it with anybody, you'll find that we all want the same freedom and liberty and capitalism, free markets. And so I really learned to appreciate him through conversations with Paul, you know.
In 1988, Ron Paul took the Libertarian nomination for president, and I voted for him.
Really?
I thought this guy is, what a great guy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that served him real well in his efforts. He certainly stayed there in Congress. It didn't cause him to get booted out, certainly, but he's been a force to be reckoned with right up to the 2012 election, where he was treated so poorly by the Republican Party. Very similarly, Buchanan before him, and as well Donald Trump more recently, treated by the establishment poorly. So, anyway, with all that said, we got into March, and we went to our primary. Missouri turned out heavily, 18 or 19 point favorite for Donald Trump, and that certainly emboldened me, and I know you, and which really caused us to get busy. And we subsequently opened up the only self-funded, self-staffed, all volunteer Trump headquarters in the country. We weren't officially the Trump headquarters, but we said we were the Trump headquarters unofficially, and we were treated as such. And I know that we got international press over that. I did an interview with the BBC. I know, everybody was in town for the debate at WashU, and we did quite a few interviews. They came to our office. And we got the recognition right up to President Trump, or at that time, candidate Trump recognized us.
Right. That office really was the result of us not liking the party. Well, when he became the nominee, I contacted the state party and I said, "Where will the Trump headquarters be?" And they said, "No, you'll have to share offices with Senator Blunt," things like that. And I said, "Really?
Never before.
Let's help let's help the optics here. He's going to need for people to see how much support he really has."
Absolutely.
And we knew he had the support. And so we offered to do everything. We said we had the donors, we had the volunteers, and they just flatly said no. I don't want to blame any one person, but they refused. And so we did it on our own, and we have never seen a campaign like that where we had that much traffic, that much response, and that many people from all walks of life and socioeconomic status and voting history. Some hadn't voted in 40 years. Some were voting for the first time. We saw everyone.
We had those stories because people would come from across the state to come to the only place they knew to come to, where they could identify with the candidate Trump. We had all the signs and bumper stickers and hats and whatever you needed in the way of Trump swag. And we have a wall full of pictures. Folks were able to pose with our Donald Trump cutout and just had the time of our lives. I certainly did. This gets us up to what we wanted to talk about this evening regarding a photograph that you were sent. I guess somebody sent you that on social media, a photograph of the GOP booth at the Missouri State Fair in Sedalia.
Mm-hmm. I was texted the photo by one of our supporters, and it doesn't mean categorically that they are not supporting Trump, but
Granted.
I find it very ironic that also there was a grand opening of a new GOP office in the St. Louis area. Again, no Trump sign. And this does not mean, I don't want people to think that we are conspiracy theorists, but based on our experience, and you and I know more than anyone, that we want to see him supported. Now, ironically, in last November, we went to the GOP headquarters, Diane, Neff, and myself, and there were Trump signs everywhere. Now, where did they go? The thing that bothered us the most was the reply when this person who texted me the photo went up to them and asked, why don't you have a Trump sign up anywhere? They replied they didn't have the money to get any. Now, what does that mean?
Well, I know I replied to that as well, and I said, hey, if you need a hand, whatever you need, we're glad to help. And
right.
I meant
right.
AmericaFirstMo.com. We're glad to step in and do whatever it takes to support our president, who has made such a difference in the lives of all of us and the future of this country. You know, this is not the time to fall back into the old GOP because this is Trump's GOP. Mm-hmm. And I emphasize that because after the election of Donald Trump, everything changed. We're never going back. We're only moving forward. And in that vein, 2020 is 2 years away. Now, we're right at the midterms. They're going to be what they're going to be. But now is not the time to eliminate reference to President Trump at the state fair GOP booth. And that's what we're seeing. It's an optic. So you wouldn't know the man's the president by looking at that booth, nor would you know he's the president by looking at the new GOP office. But I'll bet you, if you come to our office in Valley Park, a true grassroots operation, you'll know whose office that is, Annette.
Right.
That's Donald Trump. That's Donald Trump's
that's a very
office.
good example. Right. And in the state fair, people can say, oh, it's a fair. That is one of the biggest fairs going. We have other supporters mid-Missouri who, everywhere they go, they always have their flags for Trump. It would have been so simple to have something. So we're just disappointed. And I think it illustrates the point of the need to reach out to Trump supporters these midterm elections, because as you know, 274,000 voters, Republican voters who pulled the Republican ballot, did not vote for Josh Hawley. It's time for unity. Now, to me, that would seem to be one of the easiest outreaches to those voters. They're mainly Trump supporters.
Absolutely.
So,
and that gets to the point that, you know, we're going into these midterm elections, and if the GOP, and I'll call them the establishment, the guys that were there when Bush was there, and the elected officials and the folks running the party prior to Trump's election, all they need to do, in my opinion, is reach out in sincerity to all of those very faithful Trump voters and go for unity. You know, because if we don't do that, I'll just say this, whether you look at it pragmatically or a kumbaya moment, if the party, this new party, part of the old party, part of the new party, can come together, we've got this. We've got this for the 2020 election and possibly for generations to come, for my grandchildren and yours. And that's, for me, that's what it's about. You know, I'm 60 years old. I've seen most of what I'm going to see in my life. It's what are my grandkids going to see, and what can they count on?
Right.
Well, I'd like to think that they can count on this new GOP, this new Trump GOP, and what it's all about.
In fairness, they have reached out to certain grassroots, if you will, but maybe I'm impatient. Maybe we got to have some energy here.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Annette, thanks so much for joining us, joining me, and helping explain some of this story to our listeners. And we'll look forward to doing it again soon.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.